I am Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast, where we talk all about how to become emotionally healthy adults. What a concept, right? I'm always working on it too, let me tell you. And today's show is key. Let me just tell you, I have the lovely Susan Anderson on the show today. She is an abandonment expert. We had an incredible conversation around abandonment. Every single human needs to listen to this show. Would you like to know why? It is because we all have an abandonment wound. We have it just because we're human and we're always seeking a sense of worthiness and connection. The desire to do this is not bad, but it can also be a source of deep wounding and trauma. This is what's called a primal wound. And it's also an opportunity for primal healing and learning self-love and learning how to nurture ourselves. We had a big talk around the hidden shame that we all have and the root of it, the different defenses that we put up against shame, why abandonment trauma is universal, and why it's connected to our self-worth. She goes into a whole conversation with me around how we can raise awareness around our abandonment wounds and why healing from abandonment looks different than other forms of trauma healing. This is why I'm saying it's a very specific show to abandonment, and being that we all have this wound, it's a very important show for us all to listen to. We also go through how we can stop self-sabotaging, and of course, thank goodness she went through the 5 stages of processing abandonment hurt. Such a good show. You guys are going to love this show. And I'm going to jump into Susan, but I want to share with you again, in case you missed my announcement last week, we are talking this whole month in the membership about self-work that we do around negative thinking. This whole month in the membership, you're able to come on in and join me and do some self-coaching around transforming your negative thinking. You have missed nothing at all. And everything is recorded. You can watch it and listen whenever that you would like. But let me tell you what, again, as a human, you've got negative thinking. And this month, I teach you how to transform the negative thinking. So head on over to theadultchair.com/membership, and you're able to join us this whole month. We'd love to have you. All right, let me talk to you a little bit about Susan Anderson and who she is. She is an expert on how to overcome abandonment and its aftermath of self-sabotaging patterns. She's the author of 4 books, including Journey from Abandonment to Healing, Taming Your Outer Child, the Abandonment Recovery Workbook, and she reaches out through her websites, workshops, and media to share her methods of abandonment recovery with victims of trauma, of abandonment, heartbreak, and loss around the world. Her groundbreaking program is the product of over 30 years of research and clinical practice. Susan has her own incredible story of abandonment. Marital partner of over 18 years suddenly and without warning left her for another woman. She was devastated. And then her next partner tragically died at the age of 50. So she has had her fair share of abandonment, and she will teach us today what we can do with our own abandonment and how we move through it and, yes, heal it. Here we go with Susan Anderson. So welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast, Susan Anderson.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you here. I was sharing with you that I bought your book, this book, Years ago. When did this book come out?
2000.
Oh my gosh. I don't remember when I bought it, but I bought it years ago. It's called, for those of you that are not watching on YouTube, it's called The Journey from Abandonment to Healing. And it's surviving through and recovering from the 5 stages that accompany the loss of love. I'm thinking I bought it at least 10 years ago because I flipped through it at least twice in the last few years. So thank you for writing that book. I thought it was fabulous. So we're talking today about abandonment. And I don't know personally of anyone in my own life experience that has not suffered from or experienced some form of abandonment in some way, shape, or another, which I'm wondering where I start. Because I love your story. If you wouldn't mind sharing your story, I think I might want to start there on even how you became so, writing books and speaking on abandonment. Would you share with us some of your story for the people that don't know?
Sure.
Your story?
Well, I was, an experienced psychotherapist at the time that I had my own abandonment experience. The love of my life left me for another woman, and it was sudden, and I was devastated. And I was already an expert helping people deal with what people referred to as heartbreak and breakup, because the word abandonment wasn't popular yet. But I was very sensitive to the issue of separation anxiety, that the underlying stuff. So when I went through my own experience, it motivated me. That's putting it mildly. It was like sitting on a hot stove to really understand how something like this could cause, such a serious emotional crisis. And why did it have the capacity to make me doubt myself? I was a very confident, successful, happy, independent person at the time in a beautiful relationship. And suddenly I was devastated, brought to my knees, and not sure of myself. So I did a lot of research. I had to go outside of psychology to sort of, other fields, animal psychology and brain science and so forth, to try to understand what was going on. And what I learned about was the primal wound of abandonment, which is, as you just alluded to, it's universal. You can't escape it. We were all born, so we all have birth trauma. We all know what it felt like as infants and children to be connected and then disconnected, to be picked up and held and then put back in the cradle. And so the birth trauma, the separation, the sudden separation, we repeat that sequence throughout life, and it accumulates and adds to what's very deep wired in our brain, which is the primal fear, a reaction to separation, a reaction to abandonment. So this is a universal wound. The abandonment and the shame of not being enough to be kept. Fear of disconnection and the fear of not being worthy of connection, which is the shame. And they are universal and easily triggered by many life experiences.
Wow. That is powerful. And what occurs to me, something that I've dealt with a lot of social anxiety in my life, but even separation from my mom as a child. I was a little kid that didn't really speak to anybody till outside of my mom and dad till I was like 6. I was very overprotected by my father. Terrified though, like terror. I remember when my mom said, okay, you're going to go to kindergarten. I remember felt like death to me, like just kill me. Like it was so hard to leave. And throughout my whole life, I've experienced various shades of loneliness. And what I've experienced from others or heard from others over the years is the same thing. It's this lonely feeling. And I wonder, is that tied at all to this abandonment, this primal abandonment wound?
Yeah, the loneliness is sort of a secondary feeling. The primary is primal fear.
Yeah.
And the shame of maybe never being worthy of keeping someone. So when you're alone, instead of just being alone and being between relationships or whatever circumstantial, consciously and intellectually, we are smart enough to know that that's the case, but it triggers feelings of not being worthy and of having been left, and maybe we'll be left all alone and we'll always be alone and so forth. It triggers the primal feelings, and the primal feelings really are quite close to a kind of reality in the sense that we are all existentially alone, whether we're in a relationship or not. We're born alone, we die alone, but we are really existentially alone. And there is a deep understanding and appreciation of our aloneness, which motivates us to stay connected, be in groups, keep our friendships, keep our relationships going. This is all stuff that makes the world go round, and it's universal. So the feeling of aloneness isn't just a neutral feeling. It's all associated with the fear, the primal fear of abandonment, and the shame of not being worthy.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then we cannot avoid feeling the shame because we all separate from our mothers at some point. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the feeling of the primal shame that we have, it's called toxic shame. It has all these different labels, but it really is quite primal because we first develop the fear of abandonment from the birth trauma. And then when we're like toddlers and we can go coo and cry and bring mommy and daddy to the crib, but they don't come to the crib once in a while, we develop, I'm not powerful enough, I'm not enough, I didn't do it right or whatever. We start to develop a sense of, we don't have words for it as an infant, but we develop a sense of not quite being enough. And that is universal. So this is all part of what's normal about being a human being. And it's all part of what motivates us to stay connected to other human beings because we're pack animals. We survive by making connection. So we're motivated by the fear and by the need to be accepted. And because we need to be accepted so that it doesn't trigger the shame, it sort of works as an incentive to be liked by other people. We do good deeds, we become helpful, we work as a team. So it all fits into the overall scheme of the way we function. I would think in our lives, it can get very triggered in ways that become very uncomfortable.
And I'm thinking about the masks that we would put on and cover up our true self in order to stay part of that tribe, part of that group, part of that relationship, because we don't want to feel that abandonment. We're motivated because underneath somewhere in the unconscious mind, we know that shame is going to rise up. We know that abandonment is going to get triggered. Is that true?
Well, the masks that you're referring to, we could say that the personality itself is a defense against the shame. Because it is something that we hide, we bury it. It's only recently in the past 5 or 10 years that we've started using the word shame a lot. Even the word shame was left out of psychology. Freud never addressed it. So only lately are we even allowed to discuss it, and therapists didn't bring it into the room, so to speak. But when we really look at it, shame is the basis of personality because our personality is a way of smiling and connecting and showing power, of expressing ourselves to other people. If we lived all by ourselves, we would just be, we would be very basic, but everything that we do in life really is a defense against that awful feeling of not being enough, of not being powerful, of we'll be left behind. So it motivates us tremendously to be who we are.
Wow.
And some people are shameless. Some people develop such good defenses that they impress the whole world by being shameless and being able to keep their dukes up and fight no matter what they do. They're not embarrassed. They have an answer for everything. And that is very impressive to some people. Why? Because all of us are dealing with this hidden shame. And so, we're envious of people who are able to be so shameless, but even that's a defense.
I was thinking that. So, but those are people, it's a defense or is it people that just aren't really feeling their emotions, like that they're not connecting to that shame, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the defenses is not to be connected with your emotion.
Yeah.
Right, to be just blunt and tune out and not be aware of what you're feeling, to hide the vulnerability even from yourself.
Interesting. So when we look at a relationship that ends, it is a re-traumatization of what we experienced as a child. So it feels worse, the same. I don't know the thing that we're avoiding more than anything. whether it be a friendship that ends or any kind of relationship, we're being traumatized all over again, correct?
Yeah,
That's
if
what
you
this
get
says.
fired from a job, I mean,
Ooh,
going through a breakup, being rejected is
yeah,
one of the major stressors in the
yeah,
world.
yeah.
But it can happen in many situations, getting fired or having one of your children disown you temporarily, and you go through quite a horrible thing over that, or having a friend develop another friend, and now you're in a triangle where you used to have a best friend. Now you're sort of being triangulated out of the picture. All of those scenarios that are so normal to life
Yeah.
can really trigger powerful abandonment feelings. And then all of those primal feelings go gushing into the current wound. And they make you feel as if you're not stable. There's something wrong with me. I'm overreacting. Why am I being such a basket case about this? I'm ashamed of how I'm reacting, because all of these feelings feel out of proportion to the event. Why should I be reacting like this? I must be unstable. And the truth is, we react this way. This is how we're built. We're all prepared by our emotional brain to have all of those emotional memories come to the fore as sort of a trigger that just happens by the way our brains are designed.
But I'm guessing that because of the range of emotion that we all feel, some people are just completely taken down by this abandonment, if that were to happen. And other people, maybe not so bad, and they can rebound or recover much faster.
There are so many variables that make one person's situation more painful and last longer than another's. It could have to do with your childhood history. It could have to do with your brain chemistry. There are so many variables. But generally, this is really a generalization, but generally, if someone has a very strong reaction to an abandonment trigger, a rejection, a loss of that sort, it usually suggests that there is a lot of unresolved childhood or earlier, abandonment scenarios. Maybe you grew up in a family where one of your parents was an alcoholic, and you were in a situation where you were experiencing chronic abandonment because of the alcoholic parent, or your parents went through a divorce and there was a custody battle. You very often, when a person has a really intense reaction to rejection, sometimes they're misinterpreted as being borderline, but very often it's really evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment, that they had earlier trauma, and it's complicating their reaction. It's all involuntary. It has nothing to do with the strength of the person or their integrity. It's just an emotional response to earlier events.
I'm so glad to hear that. It has nothing to do with their strength, because I can imagine people would judge themselves, beat up on themselves. What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak? Why am I this? Why am I that? Etc.
And even be judged by therapists. Even therapists can say, I have a new person and he's a mess, and I have to scrape him off the floor because he can't stop crying. And it makes the person look, even to a trained person, like there's something really constitutionally wrong with the person. But it doesn't have to be so. It can be a trigger that brought up all of these feelings and has momentarily put that person on the floor, momentarily. All of this we can work with all of this and make it a lot better, but time and effort is involved.
So how would someone know? How do we raise our awareness to this abandonment wound? How would I know if I'm someone that's going in for help, and I am the one that's on the floor and I'm crying and I can't rebound? I'm stuck in it. I'm circling the drain week after week. I can't get out of it. What would indicate to me that, wait a minute, this is an abandonment wound? Hold on, or this is my abandonment issue from childhood. Maybe I don't think I have any childhood issues, right? So how would I know?
The helpless feelings and the feelings of self-depreciation and the malaise, that it's a heartache that can be so chronic after you go through an abandonment. When a person is feeling all of those feelings and they seem to be enduring, the first message is to reassure them that it's perfectly normal. the strongest among us can take a long time to cope with this. It really is an emotional crisis. But by the same token, beyond their control, it may be related to things that happened earlier. So the answer is to, at least for the person, to examine it. Gee, I was raised by two parents. They didn't get divorced. No one was an alcoholic. I was never beaten. My parents were supportive. What could it be? And so the history taking, the looking back might look into the subtleties of moments of fear that weren't related to parental abuse. It could be just your constitution or your sensitivity as a person. Moments of fear, moments of vulnerability, friendships who one of your best friends may have moved and you were suddenly cast alone and you had the fear of, what if I wind up alone? You know, the history of that leads to a strong reaction in adulthood to abandonment could be very subtle. The person needs to question it, needs to look back, because it will help to connect the dots and make them feel less crazy. That doesn't imply that the solution is the usual psychotherapeutic catharsis. Oh, I can connect the dots, have a good cry, and that'll help. That doesn't work with abandonment, because abandonment is not pus. You don't just break a boil and the pus comes out and you're better. Catharsis that is so effective in most, traditional psychotherapy applications just doesn't do it, because it's primal, and no matter how much pus you get rid of, there's always new pus coming up. You can always create more.
True.
It's sort of a bottomless pit. So you really have to work with the emotions in a special way. You have to really accept that these are very primal, and you have to work with the attachment energy that has been thwarted. The whole need to be attached in a breakup or a loss of a job or whatever it is, that's been thwarted. You've lost something. You have all that attachment energy that can't attach. It can't connect. That's the energy that you need to start the healing process. You need to work with that energy in a very specialized way.
So the first step, if we're looking at these steps, to accept the pain or accept the emotions that you're in with this after the abandonment.
Validate yourself. And seek validation from people who can. Very often our friends say things like, you should let go and move forward. Or they say, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yes.
And this just this doesn't help.
No. And it wasn't so bad. You were done with him anyway.
Yes,
just let it go. It's like, no.
Right. None of that helps, because you really do need validation. You're in a legitimate emotional crisis. It's beyond your control. It's involuntary. You're doing the best you can with it.
The involuntary. I like that you say this. It's out of my control. It's involuntary. And feeling the emotions needs to happen. I preach this on the Adult Chair podcast all the time. We need to feel our emotions. This is part of the journey to heal this wound, but everything.
Emotions are the gift.
They are the gift.
You're feeling the most important emotions. You're feeling your primal emotions. So they hurt, and they're not the shame and the fear and the insecurity and the sorrow and the heartache. It's very painful. But these are the primal emotions. These are emotions that come from the thwarting of the attachment energy of the powerful human force of attachment. And they are so valuable that we need those emotions. That's part of the healing.
Yeah, you have to, I hope everyone hears this. You have to go through this step. You have to take this step and you go through it. It won't kill you, but it will last as long as it lasts. And then you do make it through to the other side. I've worked with enough people over the years. The pain is there, but you go through it and you get to the other side. The next thing you said, which is what I was thinking about, is the attachment wound that happens, and it's severed. This person that we trusted, that, well, again, it could be a friend or a love interest or a partner or marriage or whatever it is. This friend that we trusted and were connected to, it's been severed. So what sort of work do we do around that for someone that's hearing the show today? Like, what would be something they could think about?
Well, The attachment was to a person, a job, a friend, as you said, and that's been severed. So that object is not available right now, and that's causing the pain because it rejected you. You're unworthy of it, or whatever the circumstances are. But that also leaves a powerful urge to connect, and you can redirect that thwarted attachment energy toward a new relationship with yourself. Because going back to your statement about the aloneness, okay, there's really only one person who can actually take care of you and love you and understand you and validate you, and that is yourself. And there's only one person who is responsible for making you feel safe and secure and happy and at peace, and that is yourself. And we can certainly get help from lovers and friends if we're so lucky. But when we're going through abandonment, sorry, that's not available at the moment. So then it leaves the self to take care of the self. And that sounds easier said than done, but it involves splitting, creating sort of you personify a big you and a little you. It involves creating sort of a temporary, healthy personality, multiple personality of big you and little you, of the adult and the inner child, so that you can actually have an object to give love to. And that object is the inner child. So your adult self can now develop an intense, loving, reassuring relationship with your inner child. And it's done through writing and exercises. It doesn't happen by osmosis, but it is powerful, and it takes that energy and starts to work with it. It turns this awful, emotional crisis that's so painful into an opportunity for something that's probably long overdue, which is self-love.
Yeah. And I know that you don't know the adult chair model that what I was telling you about before. You just mentioned the model in a nutshell, or almost, because the model is based on 3 parts of self: the child or the inner child, what I would call the adolescent or the egoic part of us, right? And then the adult, the healthy adult self. And so people hearing this are going, yes, this is the work that we talk about all the time. So it is. I love that you said that without knowing what this model is. I love this, because what we do with this model is we learn to connect to the inner child part. And that is probably one of the biggest things that we do in this model is to nurture. And when we do this, we are reparenting and giving that little kid what they didn't get when they were growing up. And when they're in all this pain, what does the little kid need? Love, support, nurturing, validation, all the things. So thank you. That was beautiful. And as you were talking about the attachment wounding and the energy that's disconnected, and then you're looking for someone, I imagined in my mind this little kid reaching out going, I need someone to love me, and then you said, do the inner child work. I'm like, fabulous. So that was great.
Yeah. Well, even the fact that you have a 3-part framework, there's the outer child, which is your adolescent. So
yes,
it looks like we're very much in sync.
We are very much in sync for sure. Yes. I know you have the whole outer child as well. All right. I wanted to ask, so is there another step? So we're on the steps. So accepting the pain, working with the attachment wound, doing that inner child work. What else? Is there anything else?
Well,
what's the next step?
I have a program which has 5 exercises, and the other exercises have a lot to do with using your ability to get into the moment, because that is the modality for living life, to be able to become present in the midst of anxiety. It's easy to do sort of like a yoga centering in when we're feeling great. But when we're anxious, trying to zero in and find that peaceful center within is very difficult. But we can do it because there are techniques for doing it. There are ways of getting in there. And every time we get in there when we're in pain, we strengthen a part of the brain. So one of the steps is to start to really practice getting into the moment, we could say to really start to practice Buddhism, or we could say to practice Zen or to practice yoga. There are so many different terms that people use. Mindfulness
like
is
anything.
the best, because that's the umbrella term. The other one has to do with the imagination. When we do a big you, little you, or, big you, little you, and in my case, the outer child, which is so similar to yours, we're using our imagination to create personifications. But once we create them, they become quite real. But we're using the imagination, but we can also use our imagination to create images of ourselves being able to function in the future in a better way. We can envision ourselves doing things in the future that we might be too shy or we don't have enough self-esteem to do in the current. We can envision it. And as long as it doesn't depend on someone else, it only depends on the self doing it, we can use our imagination to create these images of ourselves. So that's a tool that I've developed, that it involves a step-by-step process that is added to the other tools. So when you put it together, really what you're doing is you are practicing a celebration of the self, the ability to stand on your own 2 feet and celebrate your aloneness, your separateness as a human being. Get into the moment, which you don't need another soul to be able to take the sound of the bushes moving or the birds in the treetops. You can get into the moment and be there for seconds at a time. To use your imagination to get your mind working on a future that moves in a good direction, and to create a kind of self-love that it has to do with doing loving things for the self, not just feeling it, but doing positive actions for the self that feel self-loving, so that it becomes an activity, an action. So this kind of program will take any heartbreak or any abandonment crisis and will turn it into an opportunity for strengthening, growth, and healing, very deep healing and change.
I love it. And I love
it. Takes work. It's
absolutely. It's not a magic pill.
No, it is not.
Yeah. But the sense that I'm getting is that doing these steps will actually, you will become even a better, stronger, more self-loving person on the other side of it. So even stronger than you were prior to this abandonment wound. Like it's such a healing process. I love it. It's deep healing. Deep healing.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that when you can form this new connection with yourself, and it starts out a little wobbly and it takes some time to really develop it. But if you stick with it, you have to stick with it too. Not just does it work, but you stick with it. But as you do, the connection that you make to yourself, the self-love and the emotional self-reliance and self-assuredness that you develop, allows you to be a little less codependent, a little less of a people pleaser, a little more compelling to other people. And it also allows you to make deeper connections. So your relationships with the outside world and with intimate people, with intimate relationships begin to improve because it's starting from a new premise within the self.
Amazing. I love it. A celebration of self. I love that. That's beautiful. So when and how does the abandonment wound manifest? And you talk about when you feel you aren't reaching your potential and there's an unhealed abandonment wound, are you self-abandoning?
Well, the kind of love that most of us have for ourselves without doing this work, which is, as I said, work, and it doesn't happen by osmosis and all of that.
Right.
The kind of love that we have until we do the work is kind of immature self-love. It's kind of superficial. So when we try to give ourselves love, we wind up self-indulging. We do immediate gratification. So let's say we have an important phone call we have to make, or something that's annoying that we have to do, but such as getting a PhD. All the work. So rather than do that, we procrastinate. So the procrastination or the avoidance of the task or eating ice cream instead or whatever it is, those behaviors are the fact that we have immediate gratification. So those are ways of giving ourselves love, but cheap love, substitute.
Mm-hmm.
Here, have an ice cream. Here, take a rest. Avoid it. It's unpleasant. Don't do it. Meanwhile, we have a dissertation to write, So the kind of self-love that most people get up to without a lot of help is it's all about immediate gratification, and it's a self-sabotaging thing. It's great in the short run, but it sabotages our long-range goals. So let's say we're trying to get trim, but the immediate gratification would be to eat a piece of cake. So instead of postponing gratification, we take the cheap, easy thrill and eat the cake. So that's the kind of self-love that most people, when I say, think of a way to give yourself love. Oh, I'll go and I'll buy myself something. That's self-indulgent. If you can afford it, great, but maybe not. And maybe you can't afford the time to drive to the place to get it. But there are things, substantial, mature things we can do for the self. And most of them involve delaying gratification in order to do something that we'll really be proud of, that will really make us feel good. Like could be taking a nice long walk or something of that sort. But these are things that the kind of self-love that we're developing is deeper, more mature self-love, the kind of love that you give to yourself because you respect yourself so much that you're going to allow yourself to reach your potential, which means doing some work, getting a bunch of stuff done that isn't pleasant, but doing it and feeling good about it.
I love that. I can imagine that we do self-sabotage ourselves without even knowing it. Like having nothing to do with a current abandonment wound, but it's the old abandonment wound from childhood that's, weaving its way into the today. And we don't know it. Like we're just not conscious of it. So to do this deeper work of self-love, and that's part of this model again. Like I wrote this is one of my book was on self-love. Like it's a guide to loving yourself, honestly, because we just don't know how. Let's face it. We don't know how to do it. And if we don't look inward, and I love I say the same kind of thing, like the journey's here, not out there. We have to stop looking outside of self and turn our attention inward. That's where healing, that's where love, that's where hope, that's where peace, and that's where all the things are that we're looking for outside of ourselves. So this is really beautiful.
Well, when we were children, all of our needs were met externally.
Yes.
But we're adults now.
Ooh,
now we are the parents of ourselves. So we have a responsibility to the self. We're not children who have to wait for someone to come and pick us up or do something for us. Now we can do that. And we have our own back. We are on our own recognizance.
Oh, that just hit me hard. I never thought about that till you said that. As children, we've got to look outside of self for all of our everything: food, shelter, water, love, validation, every support, you name it. We needed people outside of self. And then at some point, really, it's a journey then that, again, I don't like the word should, but it should happen as we age. If we had, this is what I talk about in the adult chair, but healthy modeling that teaches us how to redirect back to self, then we wind up in our 20s, let's say, when the prefrontal cortex comes online, as these healthy humans that are able to look deep inside, take care of needs, we've learned how to love ourselves because we had these beautifully healthy models that taught us how. Unfortunately, that's like a fairy tale, right? Like,
yes, by the time we're in our mid-20s, we're so battered from so many, minor heartbreaks and disappointments and things, and losing the competition or having people who can do things we can't do, and why can't I do that? And, we're so battered by work in the world, competing for a sense of self, that, we're a little hindered from that. It takes really a moment of awareness, a moment of really reflecting to sort of, I think of it as sort of taking yourself by the scruff of your own neck and saying, wait a minute, let's take a look here. You're responsible for this. Let's make a relationship here where you are responsible for you. It's a moment of change.
It is. And it's about choosing self without shaming self, without blaming self, without blaming anybody. Let's face it. Every parent does the best that they possibly can do with all that they know. But it is a moment. I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying, okay, this is it. I'm going to choose myself. Yeah, it's time for me. I'm going to change my life and let's go. Like, I'm going to take responsibility for where I am and let's go.
And let's go. And when people are going through heartbreak and abandonment, loss, grief, all of these things, it is a moment of change. But sometimes the information, the inspiration isn't available to them. So they're languishing in this awful heartache and this self-doubt and this insecurity and this fear and this pining and this longing and this regret and this remorse and all of these feelings. They can go on and be very persistent. And even when you do say, okay, let's go, I'm responsible, even then, you're taking care of a child who is still feeling a lot of those things. But now you've turned it into an opportunity for take responsibility for yourself.
It's powerful. So why does our outer child, which people listening, that would be, again, the adolescent or ego, but you call it the outer child, which is, I love that term too. But why does the outer child self-sabotage and how can we tame it?
Well, taming the outer child really is very much what we're talking about now, because the outer child is the part that sabotages everything. My outer child may be retooled a little differently from your adolescent. So, I mean, it overlaps here.
Yeah.
But the outer child develops because the inner child is having all of these feelings. And when you're like 8 or 9 or 10, 11, 12, the beginning, the cusp of adolescence and on into adolescence, the outer child says, oh, honey, you're feeling sad? Well, here's a cookie. And the outer child will say, the outer child comes up with
strategies,
gratification. Strategies. And so it develops defense mechanisms that become habituated the way the brain works. You can, when you're young and something works, like procrastination, avoidance, that becomes so habituated that if you're, let's say you're in school and you hate math and all the other kids can do it except you can't, you just feel so bad to watch the other kids doing the math and you can't, you don't know what's wrong with you and you have to do your math homework and your outer child says, don't do it. Just don't do it. Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, it's much easier to watch television or something else. But as soon as you start to develop a pattern of avoidance, it becomes habituated. So when you become an adult, you don't want to be avoiding things that are hard. You want to do them. But yet your outer child will practice avoidance when you really would rather. That's why the PhD, the dissertation never gets written or whatever, because the outer child has developed all of these patterns that in adulthood become maladaptive. So when you start to love yourself, you overcome those patterns. You just don't want to be sabotaged anymore. The adult is in charge, not the outer child. The outer child is no longer calling shots. It's not a perfect system because when the adult could be getting very strong and very loving toward the inner child, but at night the adult is tired. The adult had 2 glasses of wine and sort of is. And so the outer child says, oh, I can escape. I can have fun now. And so the outer child is always a part of us when we're tired or we're just not vigilant. The outer child can step in and take risks and do things that aren't good for us and, have some of the patterns that aren't good for us. But when the adult gets strong and is in command, it limits all of this self-sabotage.
We have a very similar model, Susan. This is so fun. Alike. I love it. Huh?
Good minds think alike.
You're right. You're very right. Last question I have for you. I'm wondering, the book that I love, The Journey from Abandonment to Healing. You've got 5 stages in there. Can we go through those stages really quickly?
Well, they spell swirl, and they represent the emotions that you feel when you're triggered.
Yeah.
So when you're going through a heartbreak, it's easy to see how they line up, but we can swirl through these emotions within an hour, within a minute, actually. But they start with shattering. The moment when you realize that your attachment is threatened, you could be, certainly in a breakup, that's what happens, but you could be on your first date and you think, I like this person. And so there's this connection, and then the person doesn't call you back, doesn't text you after the date. And the connection you thought you had is threatened. So that's shattering. It's a shattering of the connection. It's a shattering of the dreams and the hopes that went with that connection. Then the next phase is the withdrawal. Swirl is shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. It represents those 5 stages.
Yeah.
So the withdrawal is when you're yearning for that attachment, but you don't have it. So the beginning of that fierce attachment energy, the thwarting of that, is when you want it, but you can't have it. Then because you can't have that connection, you internalize it. That's the internalizing phase, and you take it out on yourself. I'm no good. I'm not enough. I'm not special enough. I'm not successful enough. I'm not beautiful enough. I'm not whatever it is. It is the internalizing, the beating yourself up for the rejection. And then in rage, there's the next phase. You say, it's not all my fault. That idiot didn't call me back, or that boss, how dare he fire me? And then there is the rage toward the abandonment scenario. But because so many of us are codependent, we have a hard time expressing rage toward someone we care about.
Yeah.
Directly communicating it. So very often we take our rage out on our friends for saying those stupid things that I mentioned before, like just let go, move forward. Yeah. And then now you don't know what then the rage comes out toward innocent bystanders. And then the last phase is lifting, where life is so bountiful that it distracts us from the abandonment. However, when we lift, we have to take our feelings with us. Remember, you were talking about how important it is to feel those feelings. Because if we lift above all those primal feelings, we then grow more callous than we were before. And if we lose touch with our feelings, we might fall into these patterns, these outer child patterns, where we are only attracted to the unavailable, because that we can feel, but we can't feel just that calm, mutual love. We can only feel the insecurity. So we are only attracted to the unavailable. And when the unavailable becomes available, we lose interest. And that pattern is so common. But it's because people went through previous separation trauma, abandonment, and they didn't stay connected to those feelings. They didn't know how to cherish and honor those feelings, because if they can keep those intact, they can feel love. They can feel calm, healthy emotions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what the most important step is. And I think they're all very important. They sound amazing. Of course, I've read the book. I know that. I know what they are. But the most important thing, again, you just said, is feeling emotions. I mean, as humans, we're so afraid to feel these emotions. We don't want to go into the pain. We're afraid we're going to suffer. I mean, you as a therapist, I know for me, I've lost track of all the years when people would say, well, if I feel that, I'll never stop crying, or I don't want to go there because I'll never be able to get out of that pain and suffering. Didn't you hear the same kind of thing?
Yes, people are very afraid of the abandonment wound. They're afraid it's an abyss, that if they go there, they'll be lost. They won't be able to come out. The fear of the fear. There's fear of fear in the abandonment wound.
Yeah.
And if they feel it's an abyss, but it isn't an abyss, there's a trampoline at the bottom of those painful feelings.
I used to say a trap door that you fall through and you land on daisies. I like the trampoline.
There you go. That's exactly it. Because that is the buoyancy that gives you a new perspective and a new incentive to love yourself more.
Oh, that's so powerful. So I say this, it's not like, and I've said, I know it feels like an abyss and you're going to fall into that abyss and never come out, but it's a path through to the greatest healing you've ever done. Just, you've got to go through it, and people avoid it like crazy.
Yes.
Gosh, this was so good, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you
for today. Where would people find you, and what do you have going on? What would people, you mentioned a program. Tell us about where they'd find you in the program.
Well, next weekend, I'm going to be at Kripalu Institute for giving an abandonment recovery workshop. And I have a couple other workshops coming up. Okay. And I have an online workshop coming up next month.
Awesome.
That's a 5-session workshop.
Okay, cool.
So that's one way. Another way, of course, I have a website, abandonment.net. And on that is all of my workshops are listed. And I'm also selling tapes, audio tapes of the 5 exercises, the 5 consecutive exercises that help you with healing abandonment and overcoming self-sabotage. And I have all my books and my articles, and people can avail themselves of a lot of material.
Did you say abandonment.net is your website?
Yes, abandonment.net. Or they could do abandonmentrecovery.com.
Abandonment. We'll put both in the show notes.
Yeah.
We'll put both in the show notes so people can find you. It sounds like you have a lot going on and coming up. So we will make sure that that's in the show notes, so everyone can just head on over to the show notes and get those links and find out more of what Susan's doing, and for sure participate. Check you out, right? For sure. And buy these books, and you got so many great things. Thank you for everything you're doing. The world.
Thank you, Michelle. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed the show today. She's phenomenal. Phenomenal. Do not forget, we're talking about transforming negative thinking the whole month in the membership. If you'd like to join us, it's theadultchair.com/membership. And that's all I've got for you guys. I will see you seated right here next week in the Adult Chair.